We are debriefing question 2 from the February 2026 California bar exam. As always, we look at the call of the question first. What arguments will Betty make to support her claim? What arguments will Sam likely make in response, and who's likely to prevail? Let's look at the sentence before this to figure out what the claim is. And it says Betty sued Sam for breach of contract, seeking rescission or damages. They've limited the remedies we are to discuss, and I'm going to underline that. I'm going to circle it to remind myself I'm talking about only 2 remedies here. Breach of contract. Let's see what Dr. Sakuzo thought this bar would contain. If you watched the prior debrief, you know that he did not predict property as one of his main predictions. It was his wild card. That was question 1. Contracts was one of his main predictions. Contracts, remedies. And that's what we've got here. The other subjects he predicted showed up on this bar exam, every single one of them, but not all of them in the essays. So question 3 was PR, question 4 was civil procedure, question 5 was community property. Evidence did not appear in the essays. However, it did appear in the performance test. So I would expect him to look for evidence on the next bar exam, the July 2026 bar exam, as an essay topic. He has not yet told me what his predictions are. We'll have to wait and see. Back to the hypothetical. We know we have a contracts fact pattern, and we see Sam is a well-known dealer in valuable musical instruments, including antique violins. Betty owns a high-end music store and has occasionally purchased stringed instruments from Sam. What are they giving you that for? Well, the most obvious thing to me is they're telling you that these people are both merchants, and we're likely dealing with a UCC contract, and the merchant rules will apply. So I'm going to write that issue in the margin. Now we see that Sam telephoned Betty and told her he had a violin for sale that was made by Enrico Rocca in the early 19th century. So this is squarely within his field of expertise. This is an antique violin. Betty agreed to buy it for $200,000. They're giving us facts that go to formation. We've got an offer here. We've got an acceptance. And then it goes on to say that Sam signed and then emailed his standard form sales contract to Betty. What's that about? Well, he's a merchant. We have a merchant firm offer rule, so that's what I'm thinking about for this set of facts. Then they give you what's written in the contract. It's stated in part, seller agrees to sell and buyer agrees to buy the following product, violin, for the purchase price of $200,000. Sam filled in the words violin and $200,000 in his own handwriting. The remaining pages of the contract were pre-printed. Betty signed, dated, and returned the contract to Sam along with payment. Sam then shipped Betty the violin. Okay, the word violin, when what she thinks she's buying is a valuable antique violin. So it looks to me like we have an ambiguity here. He doesn't specify that it's a Rocco violin. He just says the generic word violin. That's ambiguous. I need to remember that I have a UCC contract, and I have to establish that as the choice of law. And this is a valuable violin, so the statute of frauds is going to apply to this purchase, $200,000. Now what do we have? Sam had signed that, and now Betty signed it. So we have an agreement reduced to writing signed by both parties. So assuming it's a valid contract, and that there are no major formation defects, then it would be enforceable against both of them. It satisfies the statute of frauds. But you can see what's coming. It's not going to be a Roca violin. When Betty received the violin, she sent it to an expert appraiser. A week later, the appraiser told Betty that laboratory tests confirmed that the violin was not a genuine Roca, but rather a skillfully made recent replica worth about $5,000. Betty immediately telephoned Sam and told him that she would return the violin and expected her money back. What's this paragraph about? It's about non-conforming goods and the UCC's perfect tender rule. What are the buyer's options with non-conforming goods? Can she return them? What's the time frame specified under the code? This was a week later, but it was immediately after she learned that this was not a genuine Roca. So she is rejecting the goods, the non-conforming goods. Did she do it right, within the right time frame? Let's go on, and then we'll circle back and look at the law we need to answer this. Sam was flabbergasted. He sincerely believed the violin to be a genuine Roca. With that, they're telling you that this was not fraud. Instead, it was a mutual mistake, which would make the contract voidable, assuming she can get the court to believe that the word violin was ambiguous and really meant a Roca violin, so there was no meeting of the minds. And now Sam tells Betty that she cannot return the violin. Is that a breach? Did she have the right to return it because it was non-conforming? And now we get Sam's arguments for enforceability. He pointed out that their written contract specified that the violin was sold as is without warranty of any kind, express or implied. So we need to know about warranties. Can you waive an express or implied warranty? Betty protested that Sam had told her over the telephone that the violin was a genuine Roca. And of course, that is parole evidence. So we need the parole evidence rule and all its exceptions. Sam pointed out that their written contract also included a clause stating, "This written contract contains the entire agreement between the parties and supersedes any and all prior written and or oral arguments." That is about integration clauses and the parole evidence rule. Betty is furious. She sued him and she's asking for rescission or damages. That's a lot of issues. Let's go over to proponics and take a look at the law. This is what I need to have in my working memory when I go into that bar exam. We look at contracts. The first issue always is to establish the applicable law. There's the rule, and there's more detail that flows out from that rule. But you also notice that there's a merchant rule for UCC contracts, and there we define what a merchant is. We define goods. We very rarely see a bar exam essay where mixed goods and services are the issue. Generally, it's straightforward. It's either goods or services. Here we have the sale of a violin. We have merchants. So we have a UCC contract for the sale of goods, and the merchant rules are going to be tested in this hypothetical. So what do you need to form a contract? You need an offer, acceptance, and consideration. You need a meeting of the minds. Our rule for offer is that an offer is a manifestation of present intent to enter into a bargain communicated in definite and certain terms to an identifiable offeree. So I would want to go through and analyze that using my facts. I don't see any termination of the offer here. I do see acceptance. unconditional assent to be bound by the offer. There are rules under the UCC, any reasonable manner or means. Sometimes a hypothetical will test UCC 2-207. I don't see that here. I do see consideration is present when one promises or acts in exchange for another's promise or act, in which there's legal detriment. So, yeah, I would be analyzing that as well. Okay, so formation is clearly an issue in this hypothetical, and when formation is an issue, then defenses to formation are also an issue. The first thing you should think about is whether you can defend by saying a contract was never formed. In other words, there was lack of offer, acceptance, or consideration. You should also look at mutual mistake, and that's going to be a big one here. The other one that I see in this hypothetical is ambiguity, a contract term subject to more than one meaning. Can we argue anything about a lack of capacity? Well, age is not applicable here, I don't think. And mental capacity, if you're an adult and you are conscious, you basically have capacity. But statute of frauds, this is a contract that falls within the statute of frauds, and so the contract must be in writing. There are the contracts that fall within the statute, and this one does, so statute of frauds is an issue. You should analyze the fact that it applies and that there is a writing, an agreement reduced to writing, signed by both parties to be charged, so it satisfies the statute of frauds. I don't see post-formation issues here in this hypothetical. I don't see any kind of modification. So what about terms of the contract? Terms are certainly going to be a big issue. So let's go there and take a look. In our schema, we have two big topics under terms, parole evidence rule and UCC warranties, both of which affect what terms are operative in a contract. So the parole evidence rule, we have parole evidence here. We have a prior or contemporaneous oral agreement. And we have a total integration clause. So that conversation about the age of the violin and its value will be inadmissible unless we find an exception. Under the UCC, the common law exceptions apply in a lot of jurisdictions, even though it's UCC. I would be telling the grader that I do not see fraud here because Sam genuinely, sincerely believed it to be a genuine ROCA. I do see a formation defect. I see mistake, mutual mistake. And I see an ambiguity in the meaning of the word violin. Did that mean any violin, or did it mean a genuine ROCA antique violin, considerably valuable violin? The other issue under terms is UCC warranties, because the hypothetical says that Sam pointed out that it was sold as is without warranty of any kind, express or implied. So can you waive an express warranty? The simple answer to that is no, you can't. The fact that he discussed this as a genuine ROCA, words, that can't be waived. What about the implied warranties? Well, for merchantability, it has to be conspicuous and it has to use the word merchantability. I don't see that here, so I don't think that's waived. But fitness for intended use is waived here because it contains the words as is. It has to be conspicuous and it has to use the words as is or something like that. So that one appears to be waived here. Performance is definitely going to be an issue in this contract because this was not a genuine ROCA. So what about performance? Another major distinction between the common law and the UCC. Under the UCC, we have the perfect tender rule. And so performance has to be perfect. And if tender is not perfect, then the buyer has options. I do not see any exceptions to the perfect tender rule here, except perhaps seller had reasonable grounds for believing that tender conformed. That would depend on their prior dealings and those sorts of things. I don't see that as a big issue. But I do see a big issue about whether the buyer can do what this buyer did. She rejected it. There's still a contract, but in order to reject that good, the buyer has to give timely notice, give the reason, and hold the rejected goods for the seller. Follow reasonable instructions. Betty immediately telephoned Sam and told him that she's going to return the violin. She expected her money back. He told her she couldn't do that. And that's the point at which this hypothetical says she sued. And then we're told what remedies she's asking for. She's seeking rescission or damages. So those are the two remedies we need to discuss. Damages must be caused by the breach, foreseeable, certain, and unavoidable. Under the UCC, there are seller and buyer calculations. You would need to discuss that. What do you need for rescission? That essentially undoes the contract. And here's some detail about when it's appropriate. If there's mistake, let's look at that. Where a mistake of both parties as to a basic assumption has a material effect on the exchange of performances, it's voidable. That applies here. So that's going to be a big issue. I don't see misrepresentation or fraud, as we discussed earlier. If there's a material breach, then you can rescind the contract. That is one large set of issues in one hypothetical. This is a true racehorse. Our message always to candidates studying for the bar exam, but also to law students studying for a final exam, is that you can do this even though it's a tremendous racehorse if you have an organized body of law in your working memory, which gives you enormous advantage in spotting issues and in organizing your answer. Just go down the issues in the order you saw in our schema, and you will be able to answer this. You will not be able to do an intense job of analysis on every issue, but on the California bar exam, they want you to spot these issues and analyze them as best you can in the time you have.